Chapter 5, Telos and Spirit, A Tale of Two Telos. Telos is an ultimate object or aim. In archery, the telos is to hit the center of the target. An arrow that is straight with a sharp tip is a good arrow because it helps accomplish the telos of archery. The telos of culture and society should be to arrive at what Augustine called the city of God. This telos can be described as an eschatological vision, a final hope, a vision of the last things. Such dreams have been captured in many places across all cultures and people, and the differences are vast, from the Hall of Valhalla, the Elysian fields, or the New Jerusalem described in the book of Revelation. The elusive nature of these visions are part of their power. It's a future hope, a dream of something better than we have experienced, or expect to experience. Just as it's far easier to miss the mark than it is to hit the bullseye, discovering the actions that will lead us to our eschatological hopes and dreams is a difficult process. Through pure trial and error, it's more difficult than finding a needle in a haystack. In the Darwinian mythos, this process of exhausting all options points to an excruciatingly long history of failure and extinction, with the final emergence of humanity as the fittest form of life. When the history of human culture is viewed through the same lens, there is a similar excess of losers and failures. Much like the dinosaurs of the Jurassic Age, the only way we know of these ancient worlds is through the fossilized remains of their failed civilizations. The irony of the hubristic monuments of ancient man decaying in a desolate wasteland was best captured by Percy Bysshe Shelley's famous poem Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture well those passions read, which yet survive, stamps on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." This King of Kings was more widely known as Ramses II, the most powerful man in the world during his lifetime, who lived for over 9 decades and reigned for close to 7. Almost no one would be familiar with this particular pharaoh if he wasn't widely believed to be the pharaoh of the biblical Exodus, who forbade Moses and the Israelite slaves from worshiping their God in the wilderness. Critical scholars doubt that the Exodus event happened because there is no archaeological evidence of a group of tent dwellers wandering in the wilderness and moving into homes they did not build in the land of Canaan. They do not consider the 3.8 billion followers of Abrahamic religions or the 7 billion copies of the most widely read book in all of history to be permissible evidence that such an event occurred. Old Ozymandias adopted the telos of power and expansion to make Egypt the greatest empire in the world. Whether it was Moses and the God of Israel, the invasion of the Sea People, or the centuries of slow attrition against the burgeoning empires of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, ancient Egypt lost the battle of the survival of the fittest. Although Ozymandias and his architects had the knowledge to build great pyramids, they couldn't keep their culture from going extinct. The lack of archaeological evidence for the Exodus is not surprising. An escaping group of refugees living in tents would not leave much of a trace. But the cultural evidence is massive. Nearly half the world professes belief in the events recorded in the Bible. To escape an all-powerful, all-seeing empire requires a very focused telos, a laser-focused aim at the bullseye. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. That's Matthew 7:13 and 14. There are more elements of the Ramses Empire that survived, adopted by the rising superpowers that came in the wake of Egypt. Many of them have survived to our day, such as the symbols of pyramids and the all-seeing eye on the back of our dollar bills. The temple architecture and obelisks of the monuments in Washington reflect the style of the ancient world. Yet in contrast, Ozymandias' frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command are absent from the faces of Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. Our founding fathers are more human and less divine than the emperors and kings of the ancient world. America was founded with a completely different telos, completely antithetical to the great empires of the ancient world, despite sharing its aesthetics. The form and context are quite similar, but the telos makes all the difference. It was the same telos that stirred Moses to lead his people out into the wilderness, best captured in another sonnet, The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. No doubt recalling Shelley's Ozymandias, the subject of the poem was the newly installed Statue of Liberty, poised in the harbor between the cities of New York and Brooklyn. The work was nearly lost to the dust heap of history, unpublished at the time of the author's death. It became famous when it was immortalized at the base of the statue, the new Colossus of the free world. It was written as a comparison to the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, along with the pyramids and other notable structures, such as the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Lazarus would not live long enough to discover that the new Colossus would easily surpass the 54 years span for which the ancient statue stood erect. But I don't think she would be surprised. Her words of inspiration were based on the long history of liberty's triumph over oppression. The real question is whether our statue will remain in place, as we have begun to trade our value of liberty for cheap rewards of affluence and security. As the foundations of our society crumble, the symbolic embodiment of our highest value may end up fulfilling the prophetic vision imagined in the science fiction classic, The Planet of the Apes, reposed in the sand just like the fallen statues of Ozymandias in Egypt and Helios in Rhodes. The nature of spirits. An astute observer may recognize that the key distinction of the Abrahamic religions is that they are monotheistic, believing in one God, rather than the polytheistic religions of antiquity, which worshipped many gods. The Exodus story, which may or may not have occurred during the reign of Ramses II, Ozymandias, was a story of the triumph of the one true God over the false gods of Egypt. The 10 plagues inflicted on the pharaoh and his land and people actually correspond to the pantheon of Egyptian gods and their principal strengths. The Israelites were forbidden from practicing the common custom of crafting images or statues of their god, and were duly punished for breaking this commandment. The later religion of Islam is even more strict in its aniconic tradition, as evidenced by the total absence of representative imagery in their art and architecture, with the curious exceptions of stars and crescent moons. While different strains of Islam have been more and less tolerant of non-Muslims preserving images of historical significance, the legendary intolerance of even non-believers depicting their prophet Muhammad has been the cause of significant controversy in lands that value free speech, such as the notorious Charlie Hebdo incident in France. This disdain for images seems in some part to fuel the fervent passion of many Muslims for universal adoption of the burqa to hide the female face from their sight. The Christian position is more nuanced. Though some groups are nearly as strict in forbidding the depiction of God in any form, the conviction that Jesus Christ, as the incarnation of God himself, is the image of the invisible God, allows not only for depictions of Christ in art, but also redeems the history of the pagan culture. The fallen idols of the pagan gods, which the Israelites were forbidden to worship, remain as testament to the ultimate victory of Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. The Greek New Testament clearly indicates that these powers, worshipped by the pagans and depicted as human-like beings, were real creatures with influence and authority in the world. The Bible does not seek to articulate exactly how or to what extent these powers could exert influence in the world, but neither does it seek to correct the notions of the Greeks and Romans. The main assertion is that these powers are subject to the authority of Christ. Though it is difficult for us to discern in our English translations, the Greek language is littered with references to these embodied gods. We focus on the abstract concepts of the words, where Zeus becomes sky and Hades becomes grave. But for most readers of that time, the personal aspects were primary. Peace was not only a concept, but a goddess named Irene. Strength and death were Kratos and Thanatos. The dual meaning of the words was inescapable, because the gods and the words had the same spirit. When we speak about spirits, in reference to gods and powers, it's easy to assume ancients meant something like ghosts or angels, invisible creatures with the power to float through walls. There is no reason to disbelieve that gods or powers can and do act this way, especially in places where people still believe and expect it. But the better way to consider the impact of spirits in our world is something like school spirit. Spirit Week is a time when everyone focuses their attention on the particular aspects that make their school special. You might wear clothing or face paint of your school colors. You try to emulate the qualities of your school's sports teams. Maybe it's an animal like the Eagles or the Lions, or a group like the Trojans, the Spartans, or the Crusaders. Participating in the special events of a Spirit Week means pursuing a different telos than the normal telos of being a student. The focus shifts from academic success to social cohesion. This could create a conflict unless the teachers also pursue a different telos, one that frees up the schedule and reduces the normal workload. Meanwhile, a school janitor may need to increase his focus and attention to prepare for an increased likelihood of messes and spills. These telos are all different, but they are all connected. Objects and environments all have telos, but a person has a spirit. The teachers, students, janitors, and administrators each change the purpose of their actions, but they all do so in different ways to facilitate the same school spirit. We speak about things like school spirit and the abstract concepts associated with the gods in the same ways. People can adopt a school spirit or take on a cheerful attitude. They can be possessed by a demon or gripped by fear. They can be struck by Cupid's arrow, or they can fall in love. People become overwhelmed by desire, the spirit of Aphrodite, or filled with bravery or rage when they enter into war, the realm of Ares. We can use the language of spirits to explain and understand the way people, places, and things make us act and feel. People might say a building has a certain vibe. Certain events or groups of people may generate good vibes or bad vibes. Mood is a similar word. When someone isn't in the mood to do something, they lack spirit. We still use the word spirits to describe alcoholic beverages, and we make use of these spirits in different ways, to lift our spirits or to wallow in grief. Both the context in which alcohol is formulated and the context in which it is consumed affect the type of spirits it possesses or brings forth. While every drink contains the same chemical called ethanol, the mixture produces a different effect on people. Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. Proverbs 20, verse 1. There is a fitting difference between the Frenchman shouting insults with a bottle of wine in his hand and the brawling Donnybrook outside the Irish tavern. On a cultural level, alcohol affects people differently. People often have associations with various drinks that are positive or negative. People speak about how tequila makes them act one way, while bourbon elicits a different experience. The same drink may provide social lubrication for one person and a demon for the other. The effects of the spirit vary according to the context. If alcohol is a spirit, it is one we should approach with caution. The arena in which we encounter it is often the biggest predictor of who wins and who loses. The psalmist wrote that God created wine to gladden the heart of man, just as he made grass animals of the field. When wine is used according to its proper telos, it is a very good thing. The emergence of spirits. Once we come to grips with the language of spirits, it becomes very helpful to understand the differences in form and context between one place and another. The spirits vary from the jungle wilderness to the desert, and from the city to the countryside. Remembering the nesting quality of the different arenas into which society is divided, the spirits will have more influence as the environments become more local. In other words, the difference between Illinois and Indiana is not as great as the difference between a roadside biker bar and the local pub where everybody knows your name. This phenomenon is important to understanding why some people find it very difficult to believe in God or in spirits, while for others it seems the most natural and intuitive explanation for how the world works. Because the God of the Bible is both Arenic and Agentic, his influence is felt very faintly in the Arenic sense. Like the air we breathe, we don't notice it until we try to hold our breath. Yet his agentic property allows him to act and move very precisely within the most specific spaces, all the way down to the level of individual people. The great contrast between these highest and lowest arenas is seen clearly in the serenity with which martyrs have faced death. God's absence seems obvious in a world where everything is wrong, yet the comfort of his presence enables saints to approach the end of life with supernatural courage and bravery. All these categories expand out of our understanding of a single Greek word, pneuma, which is used for both breath and spirit. Oxygen is not synonymous with God, but it reflects aspects of his nature. It bears the signature of his authorship. Just as air fills the atmosphere, providing us the space to live and move, and also fills our lungs, energizing the movement of our bodies, so God's presence fills the whole universe and provides the energy that makes it turn. While it may sound extreme, the truth is that something is behind the continued existence of everything, and whatever we call that thing, the universe, matter, energy, spirit, it fits the definition of God. The only question that remains unanswered is who that God is. The claims of the New Testament writers was that the one God, the God above all other gods, is the God of Israel, the God of the Hebrew Bible. The rest of the ancient world viewed Israel's God as a national deity, just as Zeus was the god of the Greeks, or as a lesser deity would preside over a city. Many thought the practice of worshiping one god only was odd, though history proved the need for a supreme being to unite the multiplicity of lesser spirits, which led to the rise of the imperial cult of Rome. Even if the people within the Greco-Roman world believed they worshipped a plurality of gods, at each Arenic level within their culture, one god or spirit would determine the telos of that environment. When there were competing gods, it would inevitably lead to conflict. Abraham Lincoln quoted the words of Jesus to make this point in a speech preceding his run for president. "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall have become lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Lincoln spoke these words during a time when slavery was an issue that was decided at the level of the state. Many issues can and do remain at that level, since the issues are tied to things that naturally vary from state to state. Building codes are necessarily different in the cold states of the North from the more temperate states in the South, and different still from arid climates like the Southwest. Texas requires schools to teach Texas history, but it does not require the teaching of California history or Delaware. Those can choose to teach or not teach their own unique history, but they all teach American history, the history of the Union of States, because each state is part of the Union. There is already trouble on the horizon, as some states teach a version of history that vilifies the United States, while others teach of its virtues. Lincoln's prediction that the whole nation would eventually come to one side of the issue or the other was accurate, and though there were more complicated reasons for the decision than good and evil, the reasons why the abolitionist position won is not arbitrary. It was because that position was most aligned with the spirit of the nation through all the levels of culture, from individuals and families through the federal government and its founding documents. At every level of society, some group of people realized that the idea of human slavery, especially the form based on race and skin color, went against the telos of the nation. Within the slave states, there were many people who had no slaves, some for reasons of principle and others for practical ones. Those states defended the freedom to own or not own slaves. Yet the greater problem was that, unlike cattle, which remain cattle when they wander into their neighbor's yard, a slave could be viewed as a non-human piece of property on one side of a fence and a human being on the other. For citizens of a nation that had cut ties with the English monarchy for being taxed without representation, the mode of slavery in place was a glaring example of the log in their own eye being greater than the speck in your brother's eye. This socially constructed fiction about the arbitrary rights of slave owners and the similar lack of rights for equally human slaves broke the cohesion of the Union. The House was divided because it served two masters, and it split at a level where the loyalty of the two sides was put to the test. Conflicts can arise at any level in a structure. They will affect the arenas of society both above and beneath them until there is a fracture or a resolution. Any society, from the individual up to the whole nation, can only remain intact when its actions are consistent with the telos of the whole. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Luke 16:10-13. The word used by Jesus for money is mammon, and there has been a long-standing debate about whether or not Mammon was the name of a deity associated with wealth or simply a word for riches. The answer is not so important because it illustrates how the spirits we serve and the telos we follow will direct the course of our life. Money can be directed towards many good causes, but if the pursuit of money itself becomes more important than the purpose we sought it for, its spirit emerges as a godlike power that is visible even in the largest cultural arenas. But as Jesus points out, the telos are the same from the lowest to the highest. The corporate cutthroats and the government bureaucrats that seem hell-bent on squeezing every last bit of life out of our country to line their own pockets did not change suddenly when they rose to a position of power. They have been selfish and greedy since they were children. They may have been scolded harshly if they were caught stealing, but what they learned wasn't do not steal, but do not get caught. They learned that true service to Mammon requires the discipline of forgoing immediate gratification to put yourself in the position to truly make a big impact. In other words, they learned to make sacrifices to their God. As individuals spend their time and attention in allegiance to their God, the power and influence of that God will increase into ever-widening arenas of society until it reaches a point of conflict. Then it will either subdue or be subdued by another power. As an example, a small community of farms can allow each farmer to pursue their own interests. One farmer may desire to do the bare minimum to maintain his lifestyle, while a more ambitious farmer develops far more profitable means of production. The benefits afforded by this increase convince most of the other farmers to adopt the new methods, but the lone farmer holds out. He is content. Eventually, the other farmers will run out of land to develop and turn their eyes to the lone farmer. With their interests all aligned, they can use their greater influences to make decisions about things like zoning laws at the community level to gain access to the resources they desire. Or they can simply gang up and kill him. Without a higher authority to appeal to, the culture has been captured by the spirit of Mammon at the village level. While townsfolk rarely gang up to steal their neighbor's property, there are many families that fall prey to foreclosures due to wider economic circumstances. The classic story of losing the farm usually involves a greedy banker. If enough greedy bankers in enough small towns gain power, they can start to affect the regulatory practices at higher levels of government. In this way, we can actually think of America as a sort of polytheistic system, where the gods of various industries take turns as allies and adversaries, vying for the highest levels of control. We can imagine that Mammon has effectively taken control of the financial sector of the United States, rising to the highest levels of prominence around the 1980s. The spirit of Mammon is clearly seen in the fictionalized speech of Gordon Gekko from the 1987 film Wall Street. Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms, greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind. And greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. This fictional account, despite being about the interactions of symbolic fox and a reptile fleecing the public of their wealth, is all too realistic. And while the film showcases the problems of going too far in the pursuit of wealth, or really the problems with getting caught, it does little to tarnish the vision of Wall Street as the modern path to becoming elite. You could even say that the purpose of the film was to ease the worries of investors by reassuring them that the real crooks are always brought to justice in the end. The fact that this message comes in the form of a movie does not actually remove its credence at all, because just as Wall Street serves the god Mammon, Hollywood embodies the spirit of Hermes, the messenger of the gods. He serves other gods, but amplifies the message of those whose purpose is closely linked to his own. An insider memo from the same period makes the Telos of Hollywood at that time quite clear. The pursuit of making money is the only reason to make movies. We have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make art. Our obligation is to make money. And to make money, it may be necessary to make history, art, or some significant statement. The symbiotic relationship between Hollywood and Wall Street and Washington developed in the 1980s because they were all operating within the same zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, a word used to describe the general intellectual and cultural climate of an era. In that time, the simple pursuit of the highest profit drove the message of Hollywood, but the glorification of Wall Street economics meant that more people would have more money to invest in the film business, a realistic means through which average-looking men could rub shoulders with the stars. In our current day, it seems that many Hollywood studios have begun to serve other masters. If their main purpose is still to make money, they have been failing. The studios seem insistent on following a different telos than what worked in the 80s. The repeated insertion of particular social causes into the plots of movies has caused many traditional customers to search for alternatives. What does this indicate? Hermes is no longer spreading the messages of Mammon. He is working in service of other gods. But why would the studios hurt their bottom line for the sake of social justice issues? They are making a sacrifice of immediate profits for the promised reward of greater power and influence in the future. Executives who are willing to tank a successful business for the sake of their allegiance to a particular political ideology will rise to the top of the list for important government appointments. Later on, we will devote more time to how money becomes a principal gateway that brings about a plethora of gods. But for now, we will return to the topic of spirits and how they impact the telos, form, and context of a nation and its culture. The spirit of a nation. Since the earliest days of recorded human history, there has been a spiritual dimension to the culture. From the nature gods that people associated with the sun and moon, plants, animals, rivers, and trees, to the more formally understood civic gods associated with towns and cities, gods occupied every level of society, up to the level of nations. The biblical explanation for this is found in a couple of places. First, the famous Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. This story follows the story of Noah and his family, the sole survivors of the flood that killed all life on the earth. The tiny human family all worshipped the one God who had created the earth and delivered them from the flood. But this plan to unite and build this city together, to avoid being scattered, was in direct opposition to the first commandment given to Noah and his family upon their exit from the ark: "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." The us referred to in the statement, "Let us go down and there confuse their language," is the divine counsel of God, the members of his heavenly administration. This is made more clear when Moses, the compiler, author, redactor of the stories of the Torah, speaks to the Israelites toward the ends of his life. "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders, territories of the peoples, according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage." Deuteronomy 32, 7-9. This is a reference to the story of Babel, where the God of Israel puts the nations into the care of the sons of God, Bene Elohim, who lead the divided groups of people to their proper territories. We see another clarification of this in the book of Daniel, where the prophet encounters a messenger from God who refers to a battle with the prince of Persia and tells of receiving assistance from Michael, known as the archangel, who acts as the prince of Israel, and the coming of the prince of Greece. These princes are national spirits, representatives of territories and the people who inhabit them. This notion follows the course of history until notable changes in the 4th century AD, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, the God of Israel is recognized as the supreme God, the creator of the universe. The nations and cities within the empire still have civic spirits, though many of them are replaced by patron saints. As the nation-states emerged from the fractured Roman Empire, nations were still classified by their gods. Many nations were Christian in a variety of different expressions: Oriental and Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and later Lutheran, Reformed, and Anglican states. Outside the reach of Christendom, there were a series of Islamic nations, Hindu, Buddhist, and Shinto nations. Many more who still held to various forms of paganism, including those on the American continents. It was out of the conflicts between Christian states in Europe that a notion of secularity emerged. This notion of secularity was not conceived to refer to a land or people with an absence of faith. Instead, it was a new arena of shared public space that allowed people of differing religions to put aside their convictions and interact peacefully along the lines of shared values, such as commerce and civic duty. At this time, though nations were now free to explore some amount of religious pluralism, they were still ruled by political monarchies, and the freedoms of individuals who held different religious beliefs varied widely from monarch to monarch, even within the same nation. The quality of life in England could vary dramatically for both Protestants and Catholics, depending on the personal faith of the reigning monarch. The monarchy was a government that took the same form as the religion of a national god. Prior to the advent of Christianity, kings were gods, such as Ozymandias and Caesar, or in the case of Babylon, they were representatives of gods. Marduk was God, and the king was a Marduk incarnate. After Christianity, the church blessed the kings and upheld their divine appointment as representatives of Christ in the governmental realm. It was a pure hierarchy, with the king at the top, and his agency was supreme. There were reforms to the monarchies of Europe that limited his power, but the essence of the system is top-down hierarchy. There were two nations that emerged after the embrace of secularity, and the difference between the two are very important to grasp the working of our world today. Secularity provided a widening and multiplication of the arenas of human culture and allowed more room for growth and development. When the American and French revolutions needed a form of government to replace the monarchy, they embraced the classical forms of republican and democratic government. The lessons learned from secularity took dramatically different forms in the two nations. America's First Amendment made the point that Congress would make no restriction on the free establishment or practice of religion. It did away with the laws regarding religion and declared that there would be no state church. France, however, kept the form of a national religion, but did away with God and gods. The first church established by France was the Culte de la Raison, which sought to elevate the abstract principle of reason to the highest place of value. Along with truth and liberty, this religion adamantly opposed belief in God or gods. There is one thing that one must not tire telling people: liberty, reason, truth are only abstract beings. They are not gods, or properly speaking, they are part of ourselves. Antoine Francois Momaro. The only god acknowledged by the cult was Le Peuple. It was a religion invented by people in service of people, with people in the highest position of power and authority. While it was described as a celebration of reason, The practice of this cult bore far more resemblance to the paganism of ancient Greece and Rome. Churches across France were transformed into modern temples of reason. The largest ceremony of all was at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. The Christian altar was dismantled, and an altar to liberty was installed, and the inscription "To Philosophy" was carved in stone over the cathedral's doors. Festive girls in white Roman dresses and tricolor sashes milled around a costumed goddess of reason who impersonated liberty. A flame burned on the altar, which was symbolic of truth. To avoid statuary and idolatry, the goddess figures were portrayed by living women, and in Paris the role was played by Montmoreau's wife, Sophie, who is said to have dressed provocatively. The cult of reason only lasted for a little more than 1 year, when it was replaced by the cult of the Supreme Being, a religion that acknowledged the chaotic result of elevating every human being to a position of godlike autonomous freedom. The founder, Robespierre, agreed with the French intellectual Voltaire, who said, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." The primary principles of the cult of the Supreme Being were a belief in the existence of a God and the immortality of the human soul. Robespierre delivered 2 speeches in which he emphasized his vaguely unknowable concept of a supreme being. There would be no Christ, no Muhammad. As a principled and disciplined man, he felt that the knowledge that there was a God was sufficient motivation to promote good behavior. In reality, the lack of Christ or Muhammad to mediate the will of God to the people left Robespierre with no choice but to take matters into his own hands. Thus, the cult of the Supreme Being became the religious framework that allowed him to eliminate any political rivals that he deemed problematic. The cult lasted less than 1 year, vanishing when Robespierre was executed. The entire experiment of the French Revolution lasted barely more than a decade, and both religions were abolished when Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as emperor. In contrast, the United States did not have an established state religion, though its founders also had a strong respect for the spirit of reason, truth, and liberty. The worship of such things did not arise on the American continent. Many people have claimed that America was founded as a Christian nation. To a certain degree, that is true, as the founders, who were not explicitly Christian, still recognized the influence of Christianity on the development of law and governance that guided their work. But on another level, they understood that nations are arenas too small to capture the God of the universe. Thus, although the United States did not have a state religion, they still acknowledged the spirit of the nation, which was liberty. Although a goddess named Liberty was an object of devotion in France's cult of reason, the French had the concept of liberty completely backward. Liberty is the anglicized version of Libertas, a goddess of the Roman Republic. She was an emergent goddess, conceptualized by her absence from the pantheon, until the proper context for her was discovered. Libertas' history can be traced to the very establishment of the Roman Republic. At the time, Libertas was the symbol of the Junia family in Rome. Rome was a monarchy under the rule of the tyrannical Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. As the Junia family were wealthy patricians, they were instrumental in overthrowing the monarchy and laying the groundwork for the new Republic of Rome. Soon after, however, another conflict happened and further established Libertas as a symbol of the Republic. Several noble families had started to conspire about the emerging Republic and planned to overthrow the rule of the people. That's when the now famous slave Vindicus discovered their plot and reported it to the Senate. Vindicus was a slave to one of the rebellious noble families, the Vitelli, but we're not certain if he was rewarded with his freedom for his decisive action. Regardless, just as Libertas was a symbol of freed slaves, so was Vindicus. In that way, Libertas became closely associated with the foundation of the Republic of Rome, as a symbol of both the Junia family and of freedom from oppression. Multiple temples seem to have been erected in honor of the goddess at the time, and many coins were carved with her profile. This two-part history of Libertas echoes the mythos of the emergence of the spirit of liberty in America. Though she was present in casting off the oppressive leadership of the English crown, she only fully emerged as the spirit of America after the slaves were freed and the divided house was reunited. Can we say that God has ordained Libertas as the patron goddess of the United States? It's long been a controversial topic. Despite the more nuanced approach to the creation of images Christianity affords, the presence of a 151-foot statue of a Roman goddess looks a bit too much like idolatry for many conservatives, and it has always been the case. The 1880 issue of the American Catholic Quarterly Review protested that she was an idol of a heathen goddess, holding her torch to proclaim that mankind receives true light not from Christ and Christianity, but from heathenism and its gods. Emma Lazarus seems to be the one who got things right. There were plenty of examples of God exposing the foolish hubris of man, from Babel to Ozymandias, Helios at Rhodes, and the French Revolution. It stretches the belief in coincidence that the Titanic, a ship many claimed not even God could sink, would fail to complete her maiden voyage. Yet the Statue of Liberty has stood for nearly 138 years. I don't think she could have survived if she existed in opposition to the God of the universe. A daughter of the Most High God. The likelihood of entering a Christian church and hearing a sermon extolling the virtue of the goddess Libertas is basically zero. But if you were to stand in the lecture hall of Tyrannus in the city of Ephesus, you may have heard the Apostle Paul speaking about the arrival of just such a creature. In his letter to the church of Ephesus, he wrote, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is Eleutheria." Eleutheria is the name of the Greek equivalent of the Roman goddess Libertas. Like her Roman counterpart, she seems not to have any mythological stories about her. Yet, in conceiving that a goddess such as Liberty must exist, she was believed to be the daughter of Zeus and Hera, the highest god and goddess of the ancient pantheon. When we refer to the God of the Bible as God, the Latin deus comes from the Greek name Zeus, the best name they had for the concept of the highest. Yet the God of which Paul spoke was much higher than the concept of Zeus. When Paul speaks of the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, it is a God that is on one hand Irenic, as he spoke in the Areopagus of Athens, quoting the Greeks' own writers. In him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Yet he also speaks of the agentic aspect of God who dwells within us. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. The agentic quality of God and his Spirit produces an effect on the Irenic quality of every sphere of the culture and the world. So when Paul says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, it means that liberty can exist as a quality first within the individual. This is why Christianity spread so rapidly among the slaves. Although they were still outwardly captive, inwardly they were liberated. But the spirit of liberty is not only an inward disposition. As Jesus said, where two or three gather in my name, there I am with them. The inward spirit of liberty caused those who followed Christ not to despair, even when outward circumstances gave them good reason to. That is why, even in prison, the opposite of liberty, the saints would sing praises to God. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's bonds were unfastened. This does not mean that a miracle would always occur, though it does explain the serenity with which many martyrs have faced gruesome death. But just as proclaiming the hubristic death of God seems to incur miracles of destruction, the bold proclamation of the goodness of God does seem to coincide with miraculous rescues. This phenomena is not limited to the occurrences after the resurrection of Jesus. Even in the book of Daniel, the servants who refuse to bow down to a golden image tell the king that God is a God of liberation, deliverance, exodus. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. This story results in the liberation of the three servants of God from a fiery furnace. But within the fire, there is a fourth figure, showing both that where two or three are gathered, I am with them, as a fourth figure is seen in their presence with the appearance like the sons of the gods, and that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. It does not require a hard look at the history of our world to realize that there is truth in the principle. Tom Holland's volume on the history of Christianity, Dominion, highlights this effect as the Spirit of the Lord brought liberty to ever-increasing spheres of cultural and geographic influence. As Jesus told the disciples, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." That power was the power of liberty, and it spread far and wide over the next 2 millennia of human history. Yet now we are in a moment when the spirit of liberty seems far away. The freedom to pursue a normal life seems to have vanished, and most people feel trapped and burdened at every sphere of society. What has changed in our nation in the centuries since the beacon of liberty was raised? Perhaps we have fallen too far into the thinking of the French Revolution. We have removed the spirit of liberty, and not only her, but all our values. The disintegration of our culture has spun out of control.